Dear colleagues, welcome to this side event of the 53rd session of the UN Statistical Commission on engaging citizens in monitoring and reporting on the SDGs. I'm Francesca Perucci, Assistant Director of the UN Statistics Division, and it's my great pleasure to moderate this panel today. Data produced by citizens can make an important contribution to overall data production, including for the SDGs and for scientific knowledge production. This data can also help mobilize action and raise awareness on various social, environmental, and economic issues, and can help include citizens in public decision-making. And engaging citizens in various stages of the data production can also help improve transparency, accountability, and effectiveness of public institutions. But citizen-generated data takes a different meaning in different contexts. There are various ways of engaging citizens in data collection and research, and the context-specific nature of citizen engagement in data production has led to the development and use of different terms and definitions, such as crowdsourcing, community-based monitoring, volunteer geographic information, participatory mapping, participatory action research, and of course, citizen-generated data and citizen science, among others. So the discussion today will contribute to a better understanding of the terminology, the standards, and the definitions being used, as well as the review some of the quality issues related to citizen-generated data. It will also discuss how to harness the potential of this data to address the SDG data gaps and review ways for this data to be integrated into the official statistics in a sustainable way. We have a great panel with 6 experts from national statistical offices, international organizations, academia, and civil society. And they will share their experiences and how these are contributing to the production of data for the SDGs. They also will discuss the challenges and possible solutions for integrating this data into official statistics and for policy processes. So allow me to introduce the panelists, and they will then take questions from me and from the audience. I'll give you a brief summary of their bios, but encourage you all to read more about their work and their many impressive achievements in the more extended bios that we have posted online. First, we have Yonggi Min. She's the chief of the Sustainable Development Global Goal Monitoring Section at the Statistics Division in the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. She is responsible for the program of the global monitoring of progress towards the SDGs. We have Aoi Chen, who is the coordinator of the Intersecretariat Working Group on Household Surveys. Before she joined the current position in September 2019, she led the program on international migration statistics, also at the UN Statistics Division. Omar Seido is the head of demographic statistics and SDG coordinator in the Ghana National Statistical Service. He's responsible for coordinating data for monitoring the SDGs in Ghana, leading data innovation, multi-stakeholder approach to data production, and strengthening administrative data system. We then have Steve McFeely, who's the Director of Data and Analytics at the World Health Organization and adjunct professor at the Center for Policy Studies at the University of College of Cork in Ireland, and the Director of IASE International Statistical Literacy Program. Steve also serves as co-chair of the Committee of the Chief Statisticians of the UN system. We have Dilek Fraze. She's a research scholar in the Novel Data Ecosystems for Sustainable Research Program at the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, where she leads several research and action projects. She's also chair of the European Commission-funded We Observe SDGs and Citizen Science Community of Practice. And finally, we have Rose Oluk, who's a founding member of the SDGs Kenya Forum. Rose there currently works as programs lead, and she's a development specialist with a focus in public policy analysis, community development, gender, and research. So we have a very diverse panel, very interesting speakers with a lot of experience in this field. So I would like to start with Yonggi and Steve and ask the first question to both of you. Why do you think it is important for citizens to participate in SDG monitoring and reporting processes? And what do you see as the added values? Why don't I give the floor first to Yonggi? Yonggi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Francesca, for the questions. I believe citizens' engagement and participation is a important part of the SDG follow-up and review process. The success of the implementation and the monitoring of the agenda is a multi-stakeholder process, and it needs the engagement of citizens and other stakeholders, and pay particular attention to the voice of the poorest and the most vulnerable. So a good example of such process is the development of the global indicator framework. The interagency and expert group on SDG indicators have taken an open, inclusive, and transparent process in the development and implementation of the global indicator framework. Maybe I just want to share some direct quotes from the 2030 agenda. In the paragraph 7 of the agenda specified that SDG follow-up and review process at all levels will be guided by the following principles. Principle D said they will be open, inclusive, participatory, and transparent for all people, and will support the reporting by all relevant stakeholders. Principle E is they will be people-centered, gender-sensitive, respect human rights, and have a particular focus on the poorest, most vulnerable, and those furthest behind. And paragraph 78 said national review should draw on contribution from indigenous people, civil society, and the private sector and other stakeholders. One of the key principles of a human right-based approach to data is participation. Nothing about us without us. Engaging citizens in SDG monitoring can ensure that the views of all people, particularly vulnerable or marginalized population groups, and people who are at risk of discrimination are represented. So we are entering year 7 of the implementation of the 2030 agenda. So as shown in the SDG report 2021, considerable progress has been made on the availability of international comparable data on the SDGs. So the number of indicators included in the global SDG database increased from 115 in 2016 to around 160 in 2019 and 211 in 2021. So despite all these improvements, big data gaps still exist in all areas of the SDG in terms of geographic coverage, timeliness, and the level of disaggregation required. So intensified efforts need to be made to fill those gaps. Citizen data flourish globally, both in filling the data gaps for SDGs and also encourage the participation of citizens, civil society, and community-based organizations in produce data for public policy more broadly. So in some countries, CSO contributed directly to data collection for SDGs, and also citizens have been voluntarily participant in public service, contribute data for scientific researches. So the process of engaging citizens in producing data is a great channel for data producer, governments, and scientific researchers to engage and connect with citizens. So in many cases, data produced by citizens and CSO help to identify the vulnerability of marginalized and disadvantaged population groups. Engaged citizens also help improve transparency and accountability of government. There have been increased interest from countries and NSOs in using citizen data for policy making. To summarize, I think the most important two benefits of engaged citizens in monitoring and reporting on the SDGs are the first one is making their voices heard. Citizens and CSOs engagement can ensure inclusive, participatory, and transparent SDG monitoring and reporting. And through engagement and participation in SDG forum, citizens and CSOs can get empowerment in the dialogue. And second, citizen engagement and participation can make their voices count. So use citizen data to monitor public service can ensure inclusive monitoring and identify the vulnerability of marginalized and disadvantaged population group. Lastly, I want to point out that engaging citizens in monitoring and reporting is not only a one-way process, that we only treat them as one of the data sources. We also need to think about how to put the collected data back in the hands of citizens and the disadvantaged population groups and strengthen their capacity to use them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yongi. Very important points. I'm like now to turn to Steve. What do you see? Why is it important to include citizens in data production, and what do you see as the value added? Over to you, Steve.
Thanks, Francesca, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everybody. So why is it important for citizens to participate in SDG monitoring? And what's the value added? Well, for me, one of the biggest challenges facing Agenda 2030 and SDGs have been in many countries, I don't think they've really formed part of the national discourse. So although many national development issues overlap closely or completely with some or all of the SDGs, a lot of the public don't typically view progress and development in those terms, and consequently, maybe governments don't either. So I think while NSOs understand the universal nature of the SDGs, it's not clear that the broader public does. So I think citizen science offers two advantages. One is citizen science projects can help socialize SDGs, making the global goals more concrete, helping communities to understand them, or form a bridge between global issues and local issues. And I think the benefit of that shouldn't be underestimated. I think too often as individuals, we feel a little bit helpless in the face of huge issues like climate change, for example, or disease or pollution. We feel like there's nothing that we can do. So I think citizen science facilitates activity, but also rigorous scientific measurement. The other thing that citizen science projects can do, I think, if done properly, is to help improve statistical literacy in the community, encouraging citizens not only to collect evidence, but to do it in a systematic and a scientific way. And in doing so, I think citizens will learn more about kind of sampling, data cleaning, weighting, presentation, but also they'll learn a bit more just about the data process, and that will help them to be a bit more critical when they see data being presented in the media and so forth. And then finally, I think there is a value too in marrying local knowledge with data collection. So people on the ground, like local citizens collecting data, they bring a lot of contextual knowledge, and I think this can bring a strong element of ground truth to the equation. And again, I think the importance of this should not be underestimated. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Again, very important points, and I like especially the connection, bringing the global issues to making them local issues and closer to people from the point of view of the SDGs. I'd like now to turn to Omar and ask you, Omar, if you can share your experiences and best practices, in particular from the Ghana National Statistical Service on engaging citizens in data collection for policymaking, and in particular, of course, with the focus on implementing the SDGs. Over to you, Omar.
Thank you very much. And the case of Ghana is born out of the assessment we did following the adoption of the SDGs in 2015, 2016, to understand our capacity as a country for monitoring the SDGs. That gave us an indication that we needed to do things differently. For that reason, we convened the Data Roadmap Forum with support from GPSDB, and we came up with some priority areas that kind of gave us an opportunity to understand what we needed to do. So one of the key things that emerged from there is the fact that we need to look beyond our traditional data systems to incorporate non-traditional data. So with these, we began to prepare for our baseline report, and we appreciated the fact that there was the need for us, for some SDG indicators, for us to look beyond the traditional data systems, especially trying to leave no one behind. Some of our traditional data systems do not provide disaggregations that will give the kind of opportunity to impact the lives of people at the local level. So with these things, the National Statistical Law was reviewed to give a greater mandate to the National Statistical Office to explore the use of non-traditional data sources. And this, we began to look at what can we do differently. And so we identified the citizen-generated data, citizen science approach as one area that we could leverage. Now, for the citizens-generated data, we tried to pilot it initially by picking some some local government areas where policy planning and program implementation happens. And we try to go down and engage widely, then understand how we could implement this to bring about change in those local government areas. That led to the development. So we picked two areas, gender-based violence, with an attempt to monitor 4 different SDG indicators, and then waste management with the attempt to monitor SDG indicator 11.6.1 that deals with urban waste. And so we decided to leverage technology in this space to do that, where citizens directly will contribute to the data compilation, and in the case of the waste management, also provide an opportunity to solve the waste problem in the local areas. So these pilots have been completed, and thankfully, our stakeholders were very excited about the outcomes of these, and so we currently started working to increase the coverage from 3 districts to about 30 districts in the country. Now, in the other area comes in with Ghana being the first country on the continent to join the Global Plastic Action Partnership in October 2019, with the president of Ghana giving an indication that he wanted to see that we do not have a lot of marine litter in Ghana. And given that 1411B speaks directly to that, we engage with ISA and UNEP and our Environmental Protection Agency in Ghana to begin to think of how could we contribute, because there is already appetite for some action around marine litter by the president himself. So we began to work collaboratively with people from academia, from civil society. And then we realized that, oh, there's some level of data that is already being collected by some civil society organizations as part of their beach cleanup activities. And these were available. And so working with UNEP and ISA and our Environmental Protection Agency, we began working around the methodologies and how we could leverage the existing data to produce indicators to monitor this process. And thankfully, in September last year, I think Ghana was the first country to report in the global database using that methodology for the indicator on plastic debris density. So a lot of lessons have been learned, and as we speak now, we are working towards scaling up this process. And already we have a lot of engagement in this space with some major stakeholders that would support us to increase the use of citizens' data for monitoring SDGs and for national development planning.
Thank you, Omar. So we've heard of the many advantages and contributions of engaging citizens in the data production, and we also heard the very interesting experience from Ghana, how that can lead to also very concrete solutions, immediate solutions to some of the problems faced by the country. I wonder now if I can turn to Rose and hear your experience from the point of view of civil society. So what has been your experience at SDG Kenya Forum on how citizen engagement can contribute to the implementation, monitoring and reporting on the SDGs? Over to you, Rose.
Thank you, Francesca, and good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to everybody who is on the call. Our experience as SDG Kenya Forum is more or less similar to what has been shared by Ghana. But the forum is the main convener of civil society, the CSOs platform in Kenya that is actually reporting on SDGs. So far, the forum has been working together also with the government as well as the SDGs unit under the Ministry of Planning to come up with different voluntary national review reports. Kenya reported on the VNR for 2017 as well as VNR for 2020, but we also do a biannual report, which is internal. And SDG Kenya Forum has been involved in all these processes, whereby we bring the civil society organizations together, we convene them for a meeting, and pull together a report under the 17 goals. Now, obviously, the civil society organizations that come for that meeting are actually working on the ground with the citizens. So most of the data they are collecting is from their implementation of the work that they are doing on the ground with the citizens and the implementation under the 17 goals. So that's the way we've been doing it. We also part of the Leave No One Behind global as well as regional and national partnership. And under the Leave No One Behind, what we normally do is that we've been having county dialogues whereby we go into the counties and have dialogues with the citizens to help them learn and understand about the SDGs and how they can hold government accountable on implementation of SDGs in Kenya. But beyond that, even under the Leave No One Behind dialogue, we've now been able to do research that is looking at people living with disabilities and how they get involved within the public participation processes in Kenya. And that research is ready and has been shared widely. We also currently are engaged in the Decade of Action campaign, whereby we are using the media to actually begin creating a lot of awareness about SDGs. Because as much as we do have those Leave No One Behind dialogues, we are not reaching out to everyone. So we are now engaging with the national media as well as the local media to really begin educating the common person on the ground on their roles and responsibilities, as well as how they can actually hold the duty bearers accountable for implementation of SDGs. So we've been working together with the CSOs, the members who are within our platform, to really just begin educating the citizens on how to actually hold the government accountable. And at some point, we'll still be talking about how we are working now with the citizens generated data, whereby we are involved in, we are in partnership with the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics in actually coming up with very clear strategies on the citizen standards on the citizens generated data. That way, even when we take this information into the VNR reporting process, then it gets recognized as valid information. And I'll discuss a little bit later on the citizens generated data. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rose. I like now to turn to a different perspective from Dilek from the academia perspective and the data, the citizen science perspective. So Dilek, I'd like to ask you if you can share your work, your experience with your work on the existing and potential contribution of citizen science data to SDG monitoring and reporting. Over to you, Dilek.
Thank you, Francesca, for this very nice question and a nice opportunity for me to be able to talk about our work on citizen science. Now, I'm calling it citizen science. This is a little bit different than probably what we've heard right now, but as Francesca put out at the start of the meeting quite well, there are many different terms that are used to describe the citizen engagement activities. And I come from the context where we look at these issues from a little bit of a scientific perspective, but I will be using citizen science as an umbrella term that describe all these citizens engagement activities into the type of work that we're all doing. And I'll actually take a step back because we've heard very, very good examples today. And I will just tell you about the contributions of citizen science to SDG monitoring and reporting processes from a broader perspective. So we did this, we did a systematic review of all SDG indicators and citizen science initiatives at all scales at IASA, with partners from different organizations. And we looked at these scales actually included global, national, and local. And our aim with this piece of research was to understand the potential of citizen science data for SDG monitoring and reporting. And we did this analysis based on the existing citizen science initiatives to see what projects and data that are already available that can be directly leveraged for SDG monitoring instead of building an initiative from scratch based on the needs of the NSOs and UN agencies and data and statistics communities. So with this study, we wanted to present where exactly citizen science data are already contributing or could contribute to the global SDG indicator framework. And this actually provided a comprehensive overview that shows which SDG indicators could be supported by which citizen science initiatives. And just to highlight some of our interesting results. So we saw that citizen science data are already contributing to the monitoring of 5 SDG indicators and could potentially contribute to 76 others. So this means citizen science data can actually be used to monitor around 33% of the SDG indicators. And in terms of which goals can benefit from citizen science data the most, these would be SDG 15, SDG 11, SDG 3, and SDG 6. And we also found that citizen science data have the greatest potential for input to the environmental SDG indicators. So there are 92 environmental SDG indicators according to UNEP. And again, according to UNEP, 58% of those environmental SDG indicators lack data. So we've heard a very concrete example before. The Marine Leader project in Ghana was actually based on the results of this paper. And so the data collected through beach cleanup citizen science initiatives are already contributing to the monitoring of the indicator 14.1.1b on Marine Leader, and this is one of the examples highlighted in the paper. And in this study, we saw that some indicators are more amenable to citizen science. So I'm thinking that some of you may wonder which indicators these are apart from Marine Leader or the ones that we heard today. So for example, indicators that require observations from the environment, such as bird and biodiversity monitoring projects, feeding into protected areas related indicators under SDG 15, or other indicators that align well with citizen science approaches are the ones that could be supported through spatial data. And the examples, for instance, water quality monitoring or air quality monitoring projects feeding into these relevant indicators. Also, projects that are on mosquito monitoring or other disease threats feeding into relevant health indicators, or post-disaster damage assessment or open spaces in cities. There are many different initiatives that we identified in these fields and many, many others that could contribute to the monitoring of relevant SDGs. And another group would be the indicators that could be supplemented through self-reporting, such as sexual violence or perception of safety. And in brief, even though I mentioned that environmental SDG indicators can benefit from citizen science data the most, there are socioeconomic indicators that are very relevant to citizen science approaches. And there's just one thing that I would like to mention about our results. When we did this systematic review, we based our analysis only on existing and past citizen science initiatives, but there are indicators that are well suited to citizen science, but we didn't include this in our analysis because we couldn't identify any ongoing or existing initiative on that. For example, the indicator 16.6.2 on satisfaction with public services, we didn't add this to our analysis because we couldn't find an example, but this is a very good example of an indicator that could benefit from citizen science approaches. But as I mentioned, our goal was basically put out the initiatives that already produce data that could be leveraged for SDG monitoring. So I'll try to share the link in the chat if possible to this paper. And I would encourage you, especially the national statistical offices or other whoever interested, to download the paper, but also the supplementary material that comes with it, to see which data gaps and needs that you identified in your country can be actually addressed through citizen science data, because we'll list all of them there, and which initiatives exist to actually start building partnerships around citizen science and SDG monitoring if you want to leverage this potential of citizen science for your data gaps and needs, like Ghana did, like Kenya is doing, or many other countries that are interested in doing that. Okay, I think I'll stop here. Thank you, Francesca.
Thank you so much, Dilek. And it's great that you point out, all the work done on the environment indicators, but also the great potential for using citizen science when it comes to self-reporting individual perceptions, which is an area that perhaps has not been explored and piloted so extensively, but certainly there is a lot of potential there. I like now, and thanks for sharing the link to your paper. I'm sure it's a very important reading for many participants, especially from national statistical offices. I'd like to now turn to issues more related to data quality, and if I can ask Omar, who already has extensive experience with citizen-generated data in his country, what approaches has the Ghana National Statistical Service taken to increase representativeness and reduce biases and how do you ensure that these approaches are successful? How do you measure that? Over to you, Omar. It's a very packed question.
I know. Thank you, Francesca. Yes, so with a clear understanding from the onset that this is a new area, that national statistical offices generally would want to be cautious in moving into this space. We wanted to make sure we do as much as possible to reduce the biases and also to improve the quality of the data. So one of the first things we did in the selected areas is through our situational analysis to engage with the local people to understand all the issues in terms of if we have to deploy technology for data collection directly by the citizens, what would be the things we should look out for? So for instance, we understood that not everybody uses an Android phone. And so some people would need to have another way of accessing the application and reporting. Then we also, Ghana is a country where we have several local languages. And so we had to make sure the different languages spoken by people are incorporated into the system to ensure that people from different areas could use the application. And for the gender-based violence one, for instance, we gave an opportunity for somebody to report on behalf of another person when the person consents to you reporting on that person's behalf. And so with all these, it kind of increased the opportunity for many people to come into the fold and provide the data. The second thing we did was to engage with all the local actors, and especially the line ministries that have direct thematic focus on the areas that we're working in, to understand the terminologies, to understand the issues that need to be put in to ensure that we are measuring the issues that have to be measured. And so using all these, it made it possible for us to increase the participation. And after the data collection, when we triangulated with administrative data, for instance, and our data collection window was a short period of about 8 weeks. And when we compare with the same district administrative data collected over a period of 1 year, this approach provided more data than the administrative data that is collected through, and because especially on the gender-based violence. And so that was important to note. Then in the area of the waste, we try to understand what are the receptacles that usually people would use to collect waste. And also because we embedded the GPS location of waste that have been identified, and the people had to take pictures of this in the app. That goes into, when we're eventually cleaning the data, when someone make an estimation, for instance, of, let's say, 5 kilos of waste, you could see the picture of the waste to compare and help you to gauge whether this actually is 5 kilos of waste or not. And with all these things, we were able to reduce the submissions. And in the case of the waste, for instance, we got over 1,400 submissions. But at the end of the day, only 800 or so made it into the final computations. Same with the gender-based violence. So with all these things, it increased the representativeness and also improved on the quality of the data that we compile. Thank you.
Thank you, Omar. Very interesting. Now more from the broader perspective in terms of data, citizen-generated data principles and standards, I'd like to ask Aoi what her work has been and what the principles and quality standards are for data produced by citizens. Aoi, over to you.
Thank you so much, Francesca. Very interesting to hear all the perspectives. So first of all, well, quality requirement really depends on the objective of data collection. So for citizen-generated data, there might be different objectives. If we are from increasing either public understanding or just engaging community and education to if we would like to have data to inform public policy. So let me go straight into the quality requirement for data to be used for public policy, which has the highest quality standard that needs to be there. Because we're hoping that the data generated from citizens can be used for public policy, then they should be subject to the same quality standard as all the other official statistics we've been having so far. So in the official statistics arena, we have different quality assurance framework that can be used as a guide or starting point. For example, the UN National Quality Assurance Frameworks for Official Statistics, and also the Generic Statistics Business Process Model, GSBPM, that has produced a long list of quality indicators that can be used as a guiding starting point. Well, now, all data sources have their strengths and limitations. Household surveys that have been used for decades in official statistics to inform policy. There are errors come from household surveys as well, and we have a total survey error framework to quantify different types of error and to give a certain confidence level to the data we produce. And citizen-generated data have a huge advantage, as other speakers have already pointed out, in bringing global issues to the local level and for ground truthing. And what we need is really to build a quality framework around CGD or citizen-generated data as what we have done for household surveys, other data sources in the official data area. In this context, UNSD is currently working on a global toolkit that guides CGD producers on quality consideration throughout the entire data production process, from planning all the way different steps to dissemination. The toolkit is currently being tested in Nepal with our civil society organization partners over there, and more countries will join the testing. We hope to really gradually improve the toolkit as we work with our countries. We also hope this toolkit can be used almost like a training guide to citizen CSOs and different aspects of data productions, and also a framework for documenting the data production process of our civil society organization partners, as we often call them metadata in official statistics. So what have you done? What did you do in every step, and document them and bring them to public policymakers. We're also working on tools to assess the quality of citizen-generated data when the data are being produced, after they are being produced, and see how, in terms of, for example, the biases, representation, and in this regard, household survey will play a huge role. I'm here because I'm coordinated for the Intersecretary Working Group on Household Surveys, and we have experts, excuse me, in household surveys, and it's household survey in this sense a good representative. Even small household survey can play a huge role in benchmarking and even to correct somewhat the biases from other data sources, including the citizen-generated data. Thank you, Francesca.
Thank you. That's very interesting. So we do have already some of the tools and the frameworks that can help us assess the quality. But now I'd like to ask Rose, how do we make sure that these data are incorporated into official statistics, and how can civil society work to establish partnerships, effective partnerships with national statistical offices for monitoring and reporting on the SDGs, especially in cases where perhaps the National Statistical Office is not open, or maybe doesn't have already an interest in using those data. Over to you, Rose.
Yeah. Thank you. It's very interesting listening to Alan, as well as also learning a lot from Ghana, because Ghana is way ahead of us in Kenya. Citizens-generated data produced by a lot of our civil society members is still not recognized as official data in Kenya for various reasons. One reason is that the geographical reach of most of the citizens is very small, and therefore the data they produce is still not enough to be able to be taken in as valid, at times as valid data. Obviously, a lot of civil society produce qualitative data and not necessarily quantitative data. But we are also having a challenge on the other side, whereby we do not have current data, especially when it comes to gender issues and GBV. We still have been having big challenges on getting current data. So the government has now been willing to come together with the civil society organizations to actually come up with guidelines that are going to be used to produce. When the civil society is producing data, they can actually use those guidelines. So we are in the process of embarking on pathways to work together with the Kenya National Bureau of Standard, whereby we can come up with data that can actually be used, and not necessarily data that is completely recognized as formal, but at least to a certain extent, it can be referred to. So far within this partnership, I see GPSDD, they are here and they're part of the data partnership with Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. We've been able to come up with a criteria for citizens-generated data validation. We've also come up with citizens-generated data guidelines for non-state actors who are producing data. Also, they've also been able to develop a statistical quality assurance framework, as well as have in place a criteria for bare minimum standards that can be used to actually recognize that data as formal data. From there, we are now going to go together within this partnership to begin building the capacity of the civil society organizations who are producing data to ensure that they are following those guidelines for producing data. So that is where we are at. The tools are ready. Is now to go to the next stage of building the capacity of civil society organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. That's great. And Dilek, what is your experience, and how do you see, the best ways to build effective partnerships between with national statistical offices for citizen-generated data?
Thank you, Francesca, for this very interesting question. And I think I should start by saying there's no one-size-fits-all approach for building effective partnerships, obviously, especially when it comes to the SDG processes and SDG monitoring, because the expectations, needs will vary from stakeholder to stakeholder, from country to country, and in various contexts. But when we try to capture some commonalities based on our experience in Ghana, also in other experiences, building a data partnership that is based on trust is very important. Probably this is not something new, but what really led to success in our project in Ghana, and I'm sure Omar can talk a lot about that too, was the openness and willingness of all the partners to work together with the same goal of using data produced by citizens for monitoring the SDG indicator 14.1.1b. And especially, I'm talking about the openness and willingness of the government actors, in this case, the Ghana Statistical Service and the Ghana Environmental Protection Agency. I know cases where civil society or citizen science group don't trust the government agency, so they think that they have never listened to them before. Why lose time now? But I'm sure we all know cases where government agencies constantly question the quality of data produced by citizens and consider it bad without actually understanding it, just because it's produced by volunteers. So of course, it's really, really difficult to create an effective partnership in this environment when everyone already comes around the table with prejudices about each other. So in our project, all the partners were willing to cooperate, listen, and understand each other's needs and expectations. And they were all trying to find a common ground where everyone can work with one another in a trusted environment. And I think the other key to success in our case was about being flexible and leaving the NSO and the government agency the time and the space they need. As they are working with citizen science data for the first time, and same for the citizen science group, many of these initiatives are working towards action. So for instance, in our case in Ghana, for cleaning the coasts and beaches from litter. And probably they never considered the uptake officially of their data by the government. So another important learning, I guess, was that the enabling environment in Ghana, including the laws and regulations that allowed GSS, as Omar mentioned at the start, to use new data sources of data and to work with the CSOs and other stakeholders for official statistics was extremely helpful. And but actually, before closing my remarks on this, I want to mention that not everyone, let's face it, not everyone will be interested in understanding or realizing the potential of data produced by citizens, at least at this stage, because it's really new as we're talking about it. And this will also require capacities, time, and change in mindsets, which is much more important than any other, probably. So as a starting point, I would recommend citizen science groups, practitioners, scientists, or civil society from the field to collaborate with those countries that are particularly eager and interested in working with citizen science data, and to focus on making it a success so that they can demonstrate and showcase this as an example to other countries, and then to show basically that this really works. So I think, just to summarize, building a trusted partnership in an enabling environment helps to make the goals around the SDG agenda common for all the partners, and this also ensures ownership over the results, which is really key to effective partnerships, I guess. Thank you, Francesca. Over to you.
Thank you, Dilek. Yes, and I think we need to come together and then sort of start building a community of those who have experience in this area, and exchange and learn from each other. I also approach it from a systematic point of view, right? The whole question of terminology, standards, and principles to ensure quality. But a lot of work has been done. It's really great. And I finally like to ask Steve, from the point of view of the health data in particular, given your position, if you can share your experience and tell us about, how citizen data can contribute to the monitoring and reporting. Over to you, Steve.
Thanks, Francesca. Well, I think I'm correct in saying that to date, the contribution of citizen science data to health has been largely untried or untested. But that said, last autumn, the WHO launched a new snakebite information and data portal. And this portal has a simple but inclusive element of citizen science data. The example itself is almost trivial, but what's interesting is the response from citizens around the world speaks for itself. The portal is only 3 months old now, and already we have over 1,000 data points loaded up with photographs of snake sightings. So it points to something, I think. Now, taking a more systematic perspective, Dilek and I are currently in the process of doing a study on where citizen science data might contribute to the health field. And we haven't published it yet, but preliminary results are encouraging, and they suggest that maybe 42 of 51 health-related indicators could benefit either directly or indirectly from citizen science data. I give you a couple of examples, like some are health-related. So, for example, the proportion of population living in households with access to basic services. A very interesting one is the number of deaths. Missing persons. So like indicator 1.5.1, the number of deaths or missing persons directly affected by disasters. There's a variant of citizen science data already been used to determine cause of mortality, which is known as verbal autopsy. And this is currently being trialed around the world. And again, there's a similar kind of approach being adopted, but we're back to terminology. We're using different terminologies, but it's very similar in concept. But for more simple things like prevalence of stunting among children, prevalence of malnutrition, maternal mortality ratios, all of these things I think are examples of where we think citizen science could help. Then kind of moving beyond the SDGs directly, I mean, I think more broadly, I'm beginning to think citizen science could make a significant contribution to more difficult measurement challenges, particularly things like subjective well-being. This is a very difficult area to measure, and I think it's one where perhaps citizen science can make an important contribution. And I think, just to finish, I mean, I think if there's one lesson that we've learned over the years is that we continually kind of underestimate the purposes to which data can be used once they're curated properly and made available. So I think once we start compiling these data properly, that there'll be other uses to which that they're put that we've never anticipated. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. That's very interesting. A lot of work ahead for all of us. Thank you. So I'd like now to, with this next round of questions, to talk a little bit about, we said how important it is that this data be integrated into official statistical production and data use. So I'd like to look a little bit at the challenges that we face in doing so. So first, I'd like to perhaps ask Omar, who already has worked extensively in this area in the country, based on your experiences, how can the data that you produced through the citizen-generated process be used in effective policy making? And you already did hint at some of the very concrete solutions that you're able to implement based on those data, but if you could expand a little bit on the policy making side. Over to you, Omar.
Thank you very much, Francesca. The first one, for instance, is that 1411B will be featuring in the VNR report of Ghana for this year. And because of the acceptance that this is a very good attempt to demonstrate the fact that we can use alternative data sources to give us pointers to how we are performing. And that, for me, is very encouraging. The other part has to do with the governance structure that we put in place from the beginning. We made sure we had people from academia in, we had civil society in, and in Ghana, we have a civil society platform on the SDGs, numbering over 400 civil society organizations that have come together. And so the umbrella body had been part of this engagement from the onset. And to the extent that currently in the scale up that we're doing with moving from 3 districts to 30 districts, we have embedded capacity building for CSOs to use the results coming out from this to demand accountability on behalf of the citizenry. And that means that you will see the data working for the people. Another area where we have also seen the direct contribution to policy is the fact that we have immediately, as the National Statistical Office, ring-fenced resources. But when we started this whole work, we did not have even easy buy-in from the NSO. But with a clear understanding, as Stephen mentioned, of the objectives and what we wanted to achieve and getting everybody on board, when we began to produce results, the institution has ring-fenced resources for us to continue to work on this, the citizen contribution to data for the next 5 years, which means that we have opportunity to feed this into policy. So that has led us to begin to think of what would be some other areas where we can impact policy directly. In Ghana, the local government system has ring-fenced 3% of funds that goes to local government to improve the livelihood and living conditions of persons with disability. So one of the projects that we have just initiated is to measure using citizens' contribution to this process to understand the effectiveness of this policy of government. How has it been effective in supporting persons with disability, for instance? And we are purely going to use citizens' contribution to the data production using applications to get feedback from those who are supposed to benefit from this. And this, we believe, would immediately inform some kind of interventions from government. Because if you are making these resources available and it is not yielding the benefit that it's supposed to yield, obviously it will. And this is because the citizens have been part of the entire engagement. CSOs have been part of the entire engagement. The line ministries who have mandate around these areas have been part of the engagement. And the civil society who are supposed to use this to demand accountability have also been embedded in. And we have had opportunity of engaging members of parliament on how these can support their representation and goals So these are some of the things that we have proactively been doing to ensure that this feeds directly into policy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Omar, and for your sharing your experience. And meanwhile, I see there are comments in the chat, and thanks to GPSDD for sharing the information and the resources about Kenya. I encourage you to share your inputs, and if you have experiences, please do share your views on the chat, or if you have any questions for the panelists. And let me now continue to talk about some of the challenges that we're facing, and especially now from the point of view of engaging the citizens in producing and data, citizen-generated data, especially as concerns the SDGs, and how can we overcome those challenges. And for that, I'd like to ask first Dilek, her views, and then I'll turn to Rose. Dilek, over to you.
Thank you, Francesca. I think the challenges will depend on the approach for when we're talking about using citizen science or citizen-generated data for the SDGs. For example, the challenges we would face when we aim to integrate already existing citizen science data into official statistics will be different than the challenges we would face when we're initiating a citizen science project from scratch. So, or the latter will require more or different efforts from an NSO perspective, I guess. So in the case of Ghana Marine Leader project, one of the biggest challenges we faced was that the methodology of the Global Citizen Science Initiative was not really fully aligning with the global methodology of the indicator 14.1.1b on Marine Leader. Throughout the project, under UNEP's leadership, which was very important, and support from local volunteer groups and project partners as well, which is equally important, the initiative has made some minor changes in their methodology to align their methodology with the global methodology of the indicator. So this is actually very important for future data collection efforts in Ghana, but also in other countries as well. So this is actually one of the issues, one of the challenges we will face probably while integrating already existing citizen science data into official statistics in different areas as well. I'm not talking about Marine Leader now only. So this is because citizen science initiatives have their own methodologies that do not necessarily follow the global methodology of a given indicator, which is normal. Because for instance, the 14.1.1b methodology was only approved in 2019. But Ocean Conservancy International Coastal Cleanup Initiative that we partnered with in our Ghana project has been collecting data and litter from oceans and seas since more than 30 years, involving millions of volunteers around the world. So the indicator methodology is brand new in comparison to the project. But so as this happened in this particular project, some type of support from the custodian agency and NSO will help citizen science initiatives and groups to improve their methodologies with maybe some minor tweaks to meet the requirements of global methodologies or to ensure comparable results. And in terms of challenges of initiating a citizen science project from scratch, this is a whole different area. This requires really careful planning and design. And this is not only to make sure that the data that are produced are meeting the data quality requirements for robust monitoring, but also to build a volunteer community and keep them engaged in the project. And it is really essential, for instance, to plan how we will communicate with the volunteers throughout the project and how can we acknowledge their contributions and what their expectations are from participation. So we don't want to give the impression, or I don't want to give the impression here that citizen science is a cheap way to collect data for the National Statistical Offices or for SDG monitoring purposes in general. It's certainly cost effective in comparison to traditional sources of data. And there are peer-reviewed publications that actually highlight that. But it still requires expertise, proper design, and an interdisciplinary team, not only understanding the scientific issues or the data issues, but also understand how to communicate with the volunteers, understanding their motivations and many other things. And I think there are other challenges as well, but I'll stop here. Maybe we'll get to them later during discussion again. Thank you, Francesca, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dilek. Yes, I'm sure there are other challenges, and we'll have hopefully an opportunity also to have another round of questions to go deeper into these issues. But let me turn to Rose and what you see from your perspective, from the civil society side. What are the challenges in engaging the citizens that you want to reach out to? Over to you.
Yes, I do completely agree with Dilek that one of the biggest challenge that we've been having is really just the civil society reporting against the indicators. If you look at our VNR 2017 and look at the VNR report 2020, you can actually see growth. There has been growth over time. The way it was reported in 2017 was such a big challenge because a lot of civil societies didn't know how to do it. Most of them have been, I mentioned earlier, that most civil society organizations produce qualitative and not necessarily quantitative data, and they have been working on stories of change and not necessarily, looking at that hard data, science, as Dilek has mentioned. So it is still a challenge, but I would say we have grown. If you look at the latest report, and I'm sure because we are doing the biannual report this year, we are continuously going to see a difference. So what has caused that growth? We've also been engaging with UNDP to also support the process of producing the VNR report. We bring the civil society together when we are producing the VNR report, and we go through all the indicators against what they are reporting on. So you will find that in the first VNR, a number of targets were left out because either the civil society was measuring targets using, their local way of measuring, as well as using qualitative data. But over time now, we are seeing that more and more targets are actually being reported on. So the other challenge we do have is the CSOs usually don't have the resources for monitoring. So you find that we're going to have maybe a donor provide resources for a project implementation, but the monitoring of that project is not catered for. So you find that because there are no resources to collect the data then that is collected either will not be enough or will not have the depth that it's supposed to. Again, the other issue that I mentioned earlier is on the issue of the geographic coverage of the civil society organizations. Most of them work in small areas. Maybe they'll be working in one or two counties, or they're working on a particular objective. For instance, if we're looking at the indicators under data, you will find that one civil society organization will actually be working on only one area of GBV. So they're only going to report on one particular or two particular indicators and not all the indicators across the 17 goals. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to ensure that the civil society really understand how to integrate when they are reporting on indicators to ensure that they are reporting on all the indicators, as well as integrating the indicators which are actually maybe encompassing more than one goal. That is still a big challenge that we do have. Then capacity building, and I think we continue saying this all the time. We still have a lot of civil society who in fear of data. When we hear science of data, I'm just thinking, okay, so we still have a lot of civil society organizations who have not moved from the qualitative data to begin understanding how to report on the quantitative data. So we need a lot of capacity building moving forward, but it is getting better. I would say it's definitely getting better.
Thank you, Rose. And someone in the chat was saying, beside capacity building, educate, and who's going to do that? So I think that's also part of the equation, right? And as Steve mentioned in the beginning, this is a powerful tool also to socialize the SDGs and sort of involving and engaging everybody. Okay, now, but how do we do this in a more systematic way? And how do we ensure that we can integrate citizen-generated data into official statistics in a sustainable way? And what are the challenges? And for that, I'd like to turn to Steve and Aoi. Steve, perhaps I'll start with you. Over to you.
Thanks, Francesca. Well, I think integrating citizen science data into official statistics, it's going to face all the same challenges that we're facing already trying to integrate other secondary data sources, whether it's big data, administrative data. But I think there may be a few other challenges too. I should note at the start, citizen science data is a bit unusual in that it might actually be primary data, excuse me, or it might be secondary data. In other words, we may have collected the data directly for the purposes to which official statistics will use it, or it may be used for a secondary purpose. But I'd like to start by just returning to some very important points that Howe raised earlier about data quality. And this is something I've been reflecting on recently, and it's kind of the nexus between new data sources and existing quality assessment frameworks. I'm slowly coming to the conclusion that in order to integrate citizen science data and even GIS data for that matter into official statistics, we might need to rethink the UN Statistical Quality Assurance Framework and maybe also the National Quality Assurance Frameworks. In terms of the Statistical Quality Assurance Framework, the Committee of Chief Statisticians only published that framework in 2015, but I think already we see important changes in the data world that might require some amendments or updates to that framework. So one challenge that I see then, as others have mentioned, is how do we assess the quality of citizen science data? And I think there's a particular question mark around impartiality in particular. Now, I think how we do this may depend on the model of citizen science data adopted. So we've already heard if citizen science data is compiled in cooperation with national statistical offices from the start, which is what we call co-creation, and Omar and Rose from Ghana and Kenya have given us some examples, then I think that incorporation could be relatively straightforward. However, if citizen science data is presented to the NSO as a finished product, in other words, a statistic, which is what we call co-production, then I think it's a little bit more complex, and I think that's where some adjustments or thought might be needed to current quality assurance frameworks. Another challenge that I see, which will be context specific, and it's the varying scope of citizen science data. So I know Rose already alluded to this. Some citizens data projects may be national in scope, whereas others may be local. And if data collections are national in scope or cover a full sector or activity, I think it'll be easier for an NSO to integrate those data. If, however, the data collections are more local in scale, then I think it's going to be more challenging as it adds more challenges for consistency. But equally, I think this is where the opportunity for NSOs maybe really exists, is to think about how to provide a framework to marry disparate parts of local data collections into a whole. Now, having said that, I think the big elephant in the room, the biggest challenge that I see is the broad acceptance of citizen science data by member states. As we've seen in the past, some member states are particularly protective over their sovereignty or control of data and statistics that reflect on their country. And with good reason, but nevertheless, I think this presents a challenge, because citizen science data not only offers a rich source of data, it also offers a much more democratized approach to collecting data and presenting data, and that may be viewed in some states as a threat rather than an opportunity. So I think in broad measure, I'd say there's plenty of challenges in integrating citizen science data, but I think there is an intriguing potential, which is why at WHO we're looking at it. I wouldn't oversell citizen science data. I think just like every other source, it has strengths, it has weaknesses. It's relatively new in concept, so I think no doubt there's going to be lessons to be learned, and some of those lessons are going to be painful. But I think it would be a real shame. In fact, I think it would be irresponsible if we don't explore the potential and figure out how to harness this new type of data. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And related to the whole idea that this is a way to democratize the whole data production process, which is, I think, one of the most important values of the citizen-generated data, is a question on the chat where that is not possible because of the situation in the country and where citizens are not don't feel comfortable with expressing, their and sharing their information. Because of the circumstances. I wonder how you see that. If I can have a quick follow-up question to you, Steve.
Well, I mean, again, it's a real challenge. I mean, I think the tendency, especially sitting in a European country, is to kind of ignore that risk. But like, we see governments behave in quite different ways in different states, and we also see attitudes to privacy are quite different in different states. So I think if you look at this from a European context where individuals are protected by GDPR, there's a lot of protections for individual data, and there's a lot of respect within national statistical offices for confidentiality. We see in other parts of the world privacy means something very different, or it doesn't really mean anything at all, and that's a real challenge, and it's one that I think will have to be grappled with. I mean, in theory, the fundamental principle should offer the umbrella that addresses this, in that if you're working with national statistical offices, the protection provided by confidentiality is there. But I think it's very important that that protection would be backed up by national statistical legislation, not just a broad UN principle.
Yeah. Once we incorporate the citizen-generated data into the overall official statistical production, that would offer much better protection. Thank you, Steve. And sorry, Yogi, from your perspective, what are the ways of to ensure that we integrate citizen-generated data in a sustainable way?
Thank you, Francesca. I think I will probably just repeat and re-emphasize some of the key points that the previous speaker mentioned. I guess from the National Statistical Office point of view, the biggest challenging they're facing, as many of you mentioned, in many countries, the lack of a legal basis for NSO or to engage with these non-traditional data sources, such as the data generated by citizens, presents a major impediment. So a lot of countries needed a mandate to do so, and feel it was a very important enabling factor. And another biggest concern about the citizen data is the quality, the lack of metadata, and the representativity that is mentioned by Howie and some the other colleagues. And there's also a limited collaboration between the NSOs and the citizen data producers. So access to the citizen data can also be a challenging. So official statistics normally do not know where kind of data, citizen data exists and how to access them. So this also needed and to create an environment and to have a dialogue and to get access to these informations. The challenges that the citizen data producer facing, also mentioned by many, as first the lack of political and institution support. And in many countries, there's no established mechanism to engage the citizens and CSOs in the official data productions. And not mention the lack of financial human resource to support the data generated from citizens. And another thing I think many also mentioned is the lack of continuous technical capacity and to support the citizen data producers. to overcome and to have engaged citizens in a sustainable way, I guess the national government need to set an enabling environment for the coordination and the collaboration among the NSOs, different government agencies, and also citizen data producers. It's important to strengthen the partnership between NSO and the citizen data producer for this effective coordination and collaboration. And the government should provide continued political and institution support. A good example I have it say is in Finland, in the national implementation of the Agenda 2030, a national monitoring network has been established to cover all relevant stakeholders, consists of experts from ministry, other government body, research institution, industry, CSO, and citizens. They also have an annual meeting of Citizens Sustainable Development Panel to exchange, contribute, and assess the achievement. In their 2020 VNRs, they put the government assessment of the progress towards the SDGs side by side to the civil society assessment. So this is a really a good examples. Some other recommendations for NSO is the NSO need to identify and motivate and engage citizen data producers and have a regular collaboration. Also that NSO and other government agencies should provide guidance, as also mentioned by many, on the capacity building for CSOs and other citizen data producers in data collection. And they need to build a new and broader expertise in understanding of the society and the social phenomena, and acquire new knowledge on how to work with non-traditional data sources. At the international level, we have, there's so many experience, and so international community maybe can help to establish some guidelines and standards and tools, and provide a platform and space for exchanging and this knowledge and share best practice experiences in these areas. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yonggi. We only have a few minutes left, but I'd like to take a question from the audience and maybe ask, we received a lot of questions from the participants through the registration, and ask perhaps all of you to give me your reflections in 30 seconds and add anything you want to add, but I'll read the question to you. How can the international community support developing countries in establishing safe and sustainable practices of data exchange with civil society actors? How can we better empower civil society in those partnerships? So it's a little bit along the lines of what we just discussed in terms of citizens feeling safe and empowered to contribute. So I'll start from the top of my screen. Omar, 30 seconds.
Thank you. I think today's event is an example, and also the model that GPSDD and Paris 21 had in the convening multi-stakeholder peer learning, peer exchange platforms, where you bring civil society, NSOs, and others together. It helped build trusts, and this would be an important model that would help in data exchange. Short, I want to say that for citizens' participation and continuous interest in any data system, there should be a clear value for the citizens, and they need to see that right from the onset. And we need to set from the onset feedback systems and demonstrate value. When we have the results, we need to demonstrate the value. That way, we get the citizens to continue to contribute data to this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Omar. Dilek.
I think just to be very quick, I can quickly mention that from our experience, the importance of the custodian agency's contribution to the whole process, not only for what has been happening in a particular project, but also how can we how can they support these citizen science initiatives or civil society in general that collect data on various levels to make sure that they can actually follow some of the global methodology requirements or the requirements of the national statistical offices. I think this is quite important to have the custodian agencies on board and their continuous support for the citizen science initiatives, and some of which will require also some funding, because these initiatives do not come into existence from nothing. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Rose, over to you.
Yeah, I think for me, it's all about data for impact. Beyond harvesting the data from the citizens, how do we take it back to ensure that it is having impact on their lives? I think this for me is very important, because if we continuously get this data, but we are not utilizing it to support or to change the lives of the citizens, then in the end, they will feel that it's of no use to them. So we need to begin thinking data for impact. Where do we go with this data, and how do we support citizens with it? Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. Steve, over to you.
Thanks, Francesca. I would say simply, first of all, we have to learn lessons. So look at the examples in Ghana and Kenya, other countries where they're actually using it. And then we do what we've done everywhere else, which has worked well, which is to develop standards around those practices and start building a common language, common definitions, things like that. So we start talking the same language. I think this will be especially important around quality and governance, because there are issues, as we discussed, in that area. And I think more broadly, we need to continue to try and support countries to actually live the fundamental principles of official statistics. Because I think that's what we see in many countries still a challenge, and I think that will spill over into citizen science as well.
Thank you, Steve. Yonggi.
Thank you, Francesca. And I think the international community, such as the Statistical Commission, have the convening power, so we can bring everyone together to discuss. Like, this is a good start, that all the stakeholders at this platform, and to starting discussing the best practice and exchanging knowledges and experiences in these areas. And also, I think interagency and expert group on SDG indicators also looking into this issue. Just maybe advertising for event of next week. The IG will also host an event on using non-traditional data source next Tuesday. So they also starting and look into this issue and try to look at what's the guidelines, the best practice, quality standards that used by NSOs, and by sharing this best practice, and eventually try to standardize, streamline the terminology and the definitions and standard tools, and can promote through this global platform, and to basically promote the use of citizen data and in SDG monitoring. Francesca, you are muted.
Sorry. I see another comment on the chat that perhaps we can address in her last 30 seconds. When there is a representative concern, if we could use citizen-generated data as an advantage to capture, the groups that are left behind. So can we use citizen science to target, in particular, the vulnerable groups or areas rather than the whole population? Aoi, if you can offer your reflection.
Thank you so much, Francesca. This is actually one of the priority areas the Intersecretariat Working Group on Household Surveys has put down for the next few years. We have a position paper that will be uploaded today on the Commission website. It's positioning household survey for the next decade. So this is the top priority for our group, to see how the survey household survey community will support our non-traditional data sources, including citizen-generated data. Having said that, I think it's also very important for us from an official data perspective to understand, have a good understanding of what type of data, so we can provide the right tool, because we've heard a lot about qualitative data, qualitative data, and I do not have with surveys in terms of qualitative data. And there isn't much experiences on how to really work with the data quality. So I think it's really important for us to have a better understanding and then really step into our civil society organizations and see what have been done and how can we learn from them. The last point is, I think the CSOs and citizen generated data are so successful in getting citizens engaged. I think there's a lot for us to learn because household survey is facing a huge crisis in terms of response rate. So how do you manage to get people work with you? Can we learn from you so we can get our respondents engaged as well, so they are willing to complete the survey questionnaire? Thank you.
Thank you, Oi, and sorry we're out of time. There are so many other comments, and I have a list of questions that were submitted that are all incredibly interesting. But I think this is, we learned a lot today. We see, the incredible potential of citizen-generated data and citizen science to not only to contribute to the data production, but to really socialize the SDGs, increase the citizen participation in the whole process, and also the overall, what we talked about, the democratization of the data production process overall. So there is a lot more to unpack, a lot more to discuss, and a lot more work to do if we want this to become really part of the official statistical and data systems in countries, including from the point of view of capacity building and enabling, both sides to really have the tools to do this. So we'll have an opportunity at the UN Statistics Division. We're planning to bring together this community again in a more sort of extensive format through an expert group meeting before the end of the year. So, but meanwhile, I'll encourage you all to stay in touch with the great panelists that we had today, who can, I'm sure, are happy to continue to share their experience and their views. So let me thank again our panelists, great interventions, very, very interesting to hear your experience. Thank the audience for all their contributions in the chat and their inputs. And I look forward to seeing you at the next side events of the Statistical Commission as we continue and we move to the official Statistical Commission at the end of the month, early March. This will be available, the recording, so for those of you who want to listen again or share with other colleagues. Thanks so much, and good to have you all. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.